On Friday evening, the message from the White House was absolute. President Trump told reporters that Iran was finished. The Navy was gone, the Air Force was flattened, and the air defenses were a memory. But just 72 hours later, on Monday morning, the obliteration narrative vanished. Trump backed down and asked for 5 days of peace. He claimed it was the result of productive conversations. But Iran's response was a cold, public slap in the face. There is no dialogue with the United States. But Iran is also keep hitting back hard. It is Tuesday, March 24th, 2026, and the 48-hour ultimatum from President Trump has officially expired. At 3:14 a.m., the world held its breath, and then the sirens started. Despite the White House claiming there was a 5-day pause in the works, the missiles on the ground tell a different story. The diplomacy is dead, the missiles are in the air, and the second Iran war has just entered its most violent phase. Here is exactly what happened overnight. Let's look at the targets. For the 5th time since midnight, the Iron Dome was pushed to its breaking point. We have confirmed multiple impact sites in Tel Aviv. Specifically, the Rosh HaAyin district was hit, leaving residential buildings partially gutted. Look at this destruction. This isn't just a scare tactic anymore. These are heavy warheads hitting civilian centers. In Jerusalem, a loud blast rang out early this morning, followed by billowing smoke. In the north, search and rescue teams are currently operating at a scene where a building was struck. The human cost is rising. Since February 28th, over 4,700 Israelis have been injured. Iran is intentionally targeting high-density areas to force the domestic cost of this war to a breaking point. How did they get through? This is the technical core of today's attack. Iran is now deploying cluster warheads on their Ghadar 110 and Khorramshahr 4 missiles. Standard defense systems like the Arrow 3 are designed to hit one big target. But with cluster technology, the missile splits mid-air into 80 separate bomblets. It's a saturation tactic. If the Iron Dome hits 79 of them, the one that gets through can still destroy a city block. Iran is betting they can fire $20,000 submunitions faster than Israel can build $4 million interceptors. They are bleeding the defense dry. The most terrifying development isn't in Israel. It's in the Indian Ocean. Over the weekend, missiles were tracked heading for Diego Garcia, a joint U.S.-UK base over 4,000 kilometers from Iran. This proves that Iran has officially broken its 2,000-kilometer range limit. If they can hit a tiny island in the middle of the ocean, they can hit Rome, Berlin, or London, as you can see in the map. Israel's military chief, Eyal Zamir, has confirmed these were 2-stage intercontinental ballistic missiles. The second Iran war is no longer a regional conflict. It is a global security crisis that puts the entire Western world in the crosshairs. Trump keeps saying he's had productive talks. Iran's parliament speaker, Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, says no negotiations have happened. Why the disconnect? We also need to talk about what it takes to make that happen. This is a U.S. military that spends close to $1 trillion a year. It has 13,000 aircraft, 11 nuclear carriers, and the most advanced technology ever fielded. On the other side is a nation under sanctions for 40 years. No stealth bombers, no fifth-generation fighters, no carriers. And yet Iran just pushed 2 American carrier strike groups 1,000 kilometers backward. On March 19th, the $1 trillion promise of the F-35 Lightning II shattered. An F-35A made an emergency landing at a regional base after a mission over Iran. The pilot had shrapnel wounds. While CENTCOM tried to downplay it, the IRGC released footage of the strike. This is the first time in history that an F-35 has taken enemy fire and been severely damaged. How did they do it? They didn't use radar. Radar is what the F-35 is designed to hide from. Instead, Iran used passive infrared tracking, systems like the Majid, that detect the engine's heat signature. They ignored the stealth geometry and looked for the fire. This data is now worth more to China and Russia than a decade of espionage. If a sanctioned country can track and hit an F-35 with heat seekers, the entire strategic justification for the most expensive weapons program in history evaporates. Japan, Australia, the UK, and half of NATO, who all fly this jet, are now recalculating their own survival. But the F-35 wasn't the only loss. By March 17th, over a dozen MQ-9 Reaper drones, worth $15 million each, were confirmed destroyed. But the real reason Trump offered a 5-day pause isn't the planes. It's what Iran did to America's eyes. On day one, Iran struck the AN/FPS-132 Block 5 radar in Qatar. This is a massive fixed installation that tracks ballistic missiles from 5,000 kilometers away. It's the only one of its kind outside the United States. It will take 5 to 8 years to replace. Then they went after the THAAD batteries. Satellite imagery from Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE shows blackened craters where billion-dollar ANTPY-2 radars used to sit. Iran used $60,000 drones to destroy $1 billion radar systems. That cost ratio is the math of a losing war. The U.S. is now pulling Patriot systems out of South Korea just to patch the holes in the Gulf, weakening deterrence against North Korea in the process. Now look at the Navy. The USS Gerald R. Ford, a $13 billion supercarrier, is currently docked in Crete for, quote, repairs after a massive fire in its laundry room. Meanwhile, the USS Abraham Lincoln has pulled back to 1,100 kilometers from the Iranian coast. Why? Iran's anti-ship missiles and, quote, swarm boat doctrine have made the Persian Gulf a death trap for carriers. When the carriers move back, the aircraft they carry have less time over the target. The, quote, force projection has failed. But Iran's most devastating weapon costs nothing. The Strait of Hormuz. On March 4th, Iran effectively sealed the strait. 20% of global oil flows through that narrow gap. When it shut down, Brent crude crossed $100 and hit $119. Fertilizer prices surged by 40%, directly threatening the American Midwest planting season. Goldman Sachs just raised the probability of a U.S. recession to 25%. Donald Trump is trapped. He cannot escalate further without triggering a global economic catastrophe. Imagine $200 oil and a total market collapse. He cannot withdraw without admitting the entire Operation Epic Fury was a failure. And he cannot stay on the current course because the losses, the drones, the radars, the pilots, are compounding faster than the victories. Look at his behavior over the last 4 days. Friday, claims victory. Saturday, threatens to obliterate Iran's power plants in 48 hours. Sunday, dispatches Jared Kushner for back-channel talks. Monday, the deadline expires, he doesn't strike, and he announces a 5-day pause. This isn't a strategy. This is a man looking for an exit he cannot find. Every defense ministry on earth is watching this. They are seeing that overwhelming force isn't working against a prepared asymmetric adversary. As of today, March 24th, 5,000 Marines are converging on the Gulf. Pentagon planners are discussing seizing Karg Island, Iran's main oil terminal. But as one retired admiral put it, if we seize Karg, they just turn off the spigot on the other end. It's a self-imposed hostage crisis. Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, hasn't appeared in public, but his written statements are clear. Iran will not talk until the aggression stops. They have lost 1,400 people and their supreme leader on day one, yet they are still firing missiles at Israel and American bases as far as Diego Garcia. White House announced a 5-day pause. While the U.S. narrative speaks of productive back-channel talks in Islamabad, Tehran has publicly dismissed these claims as a psychological operation. The reality is that we are witnessing a strategic stalemate that the world's most advanced military never saw coming. Since the war began on February 28th, the U.S. and Israel have conducted over 9,000 combat flights. Yet Iran's mosaic defense remains functional. This decentralized command structure allowed local units to keep fighting even after the loss of their top leadership on day one. On Tuesday, March 24th, Iran launched its 78th wave of retaliatory strikes, titled Operation True Promise 4. For the first time, these strikes achieved direct hits on residential and sensitive targets in Tel Aviv, proving that despite 3 weeks of heavy bombing, Iran's missile accuracy is actually increasing. The crisis in the Strait of Hormuz has now reached a critical breaking point. With 20% of the world's oil supply frozen, Brent crude is oscillating wildly around the $100 mark. Trump's threat to destroy Iran's energy infrastructure was met with a chilling counter-threat. Iran warned that any strike on its grid would trigger the total destruction of desalination and power plants across the entire Gulf. This would leave millions of people in U.S. allied nations without water or electricity. This energy suicide pact is likely what forced the sudden 5-day pause. Furthermore, the myth of the unkillable F-35 has been officially shaken. On March 19th, an F-35A was forced into an emergency landing after being struck by Iranian fire. Evidence suggests Iran used passive infrared sensors, like the Majid system, which track heat rather than radar. Because these systems stay silent, they don't trigger the aircraft's onboard warning sensors. This vulnerability has sent a shockwave through the 19 countries that rely on the F-35 as their primary defense. As we look toward the end of this 5-day window, the U.S. is facing 3 impossible choices. It can launch a full-scale ground invasion, a move that would require 500,000 troops and years of conflict. It can unilaterally withdraw, which would leave Iran in control of the world's most important shipping lane. Or it can continue this air war of attrition, where billion-dollar assets are being traded for $60,000 drones. The clock is ticking towards Saturday. If the pause ends without a breakthrough, the next phase of this conflict could move beyond the regional level and trigger a global economic collapse. Neither side planned for a war that would last this long or cost this much. The world is waiting to see if the art of the deal can find an exit from a quagmire that has no easy way out. The next 5 days matter more than the previous 24. If the pause ends without a deal, and Iran says there is no deal, the U.S. faces a choice: a full-scale ground war that no one planned for, or a humiliating withdrawal that signals the end of American dominance in the Middle East. What do you think happens when the clock runs out? Will the U.S. double down, or is this the beginning of the end for the trillion-dollar war machine? Let me know in the comments.